You guys covered a series. There's a series on the civil rights movement. Why them?
Why the civil rights movement?
Yes.
Well, part of what we are looking at in the series is not just the spiritual role that the Black church has played in the African American community, but because it's one of the few institutions that has been solely controlled by Black people
Yeah.
for since the very beginning. The church, as an institution, has also played a political and a social role in the community's growth and development from during slavery through Reconstruction. And we certainly saw that the church was incredibly active in mobilization and in organizing around the civil rights effort in the 50s and 60s. And so for us, that was a really important thread to kind of explore about the role of the church during that period, and certainly the leaders that emerged out of the church, like Martin Luther King and various pastors.
Yeah. Did Black Americans go about the civil rights movement in the right way?
How do you mean?
When I was growing up in Alabama just before the civil rights movement even started, right? And I remember that prior to the civil rights movement, blacks were more independent individuals. They had families, they worked. They didn't rely on the government or any leaders to guide them. And once the civil rights movement started, all that seemed to, that independence and hard work and self-reliance and family and God seemed to have gone and went to the wayside. And blacks have gone, it's just been downhill for black folks ever since then. It to me, the civil rights movement was a big mistake. It should have never happened. And I believe that blacks would be more, they would be independent and free today as individuals rather than being into the black thing.
Well, I think there are some arguments that a lot of people, or some people have had about the community that was built behind the color line during Jim Crow segregation, and how African Americans, built their own self-determination
Yeah.
and built stronger communities, and we're kind of all in the same boat during that time, and that integration sort of fractured some of those bonds, and divided that community by class. The middle class African Americans who had been living in those communities behind the color line, some of them left to go elsewhere. And, integration provided lots of opportunities that allowed folks to, work for mainstream news organizations and not work for the Black press or stuff like that. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of people who feel that way. About that transition, but I certainly think other people would also argue that that working towards civil rights and making sure that Black people were not treated as second-class citizens within their own country was a very important effort.
But we
Um,
didn't seem to care about that then. No such thing as civil rights, right? We weren't thinking of that. Blacks were building their lives. They built black universities and high schools, and they went there. They came back as teachers and professionals. And I think that had blacks continued down that road, they would be better off today. They would be like the Jews. The Jews are very independent. I believe that blacks would be very independent had that not happened and not trying to make someone love them. They wouldn't be begging for love by taking other people's stuff and intimidating them and all that. They seem to be begging for love now instead of being, I'm accustomed to blacks being independent and treating all people the way they would like to be treated. In return, they got their back in return because they were respected. But the civil rights movement, along with other things, seem to have taken that away from the black. And they're in a blaming and begging mode right now, kind of a mob mentality. Unlike the Jews who kept their independence and worked their way through rather than trying to make someone love them.
yeah, well, I think there's a lot of people who think all kinds of ways about that, and I think our goal as filmmakers is just to present the history as we came across it, and whether people have their own personal experiences or personal beliefs on whether something was the right decision or not the right decision was not really something that we were thinking about
Right.
necessarily as filmmakers.
Did you notice that though while making this film, because you put a lot of work into it? Did you notice the difference in the change once the civil rights movement came along? They went
Um,
downhill.
well, I don't know if I would necessarily say that things went downhill. I think there were just a lot of different experiences on all sides. I think one of the important things that we wanted to share in the series was that, not everyone was supportive of the civil rights movement, that there
Yeah.
were a lot of conservative elements within the community that felt that was radical or didn't feel like it was necessary. And so it was important for us to convey that the African American community is not a monolith, that there are a lot of different people within that community who believe all kinds of things. There's a
Right.
spectrum within that. And so, I think that was really important for us to convey, and not really make any judgments about that.
In your opinion, was Lyndon B. Johnson a good influence in doing this movie? Was it Lyndon B. Johnson a good influence for the blacks or bad?
I didn't work on that episode.
Oh,
So it's hard for me to say with any certainty whether he was a important or not important person.
one thing I wondered about in the civil rights aspect of the movie, I've noticed that some of the so-called leadership in the civil rights movement, like Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, and others. I know that Dr. Martin Luther King never liked Jesse Jackson because Jesse Jackson always had a hidden agenda, right? He threw him out of the movement a couple of times. And I noticed that once Dr. King was assassinated, Jackson and Sharpton, they seem like they are race hustlers. So they've taken what looked like it meant to be a good intention and turned it into a personal gain by causing blacks to blame white folks and hate white people for their own personal gain. Did you see that?
I didn't necessarily see that. I mean, we interviewed Al Sharpton for the series, and
I was
you know,
sorry
for,
about that. What a mess.
oh no. Well, I actually thought, his insights and his experiences were very valuable, for our audience. And, he felt very influenced by the things that he learned as a young person in the King movement. And
Right.
that influenced a lot of the work that he went on to do with the National Action Network and, with his political activism and electoral aspirations. So, for us, it was just really important to show those folks who had firsthand experiences in both the church and in the politics of the day, in terms of what we were sharing with our audience, and to hear from them firsthand about
Oh, I see.
what motivated,
So you're
their.
trying to show the good and the bad, because there's both
Yeah,
things.
we're just presenting things as they are and leaving it up to our audience to come to their own conclusions about whether they buy it
Right.
or buy it or like it or don't like it or see it as the right move or the wrong move. That I don't think that was necessarily our goal. Is